All right, we just showed up at the job site. We're in Lakewood, California. We're gonna do a little backyard remodel. The homeowner had already started a lot of this project. He rented a little Toro Dingo local rental shop, and he did all this demo. He excavated all the grass, weeds, dirt out of here with the Dingo. So the plan is, what we're gonna do here, out of the slider door, we're gonna have concrete patio that's gonna come right off the corner of the house here. This downspout's gonna get hooked up to an underground drain that goes out to the front yard. As we go this way down the back of the house, a lot of this stuff right here is gonna get reworked. No more sprinklers because we're gonna do artificial turf in some of these areas back here. Here's an old galvanized sprinkler line right here. That's coming out. All of these where the stations were actually set, those are coming out. This ground cable will go underground, pop back up, reconnect here. We're gonna do artificial turf from this point here, artificial turf all the way back with stepping stones to get to that back door, the garage door in the back there. And then we're going to have some under drains under the turf throughout this area as well. Coming back this way, this is wall-to-wall concrete in here from the block to the house. In this area where I'm at, we're on the turf, and that turf extends all the way to where this steel stake is, right to the edge of this window. So this will be a nice little turf area for pets or things of that nature, or kids playing on a little play set or whatever. Then we're going to go wall-to-wall concrete again in this area. The gas meter is above ground, so that's no problem. We'll wrap the bottom of that gas line with some foam and pour right around it. From the looks of things here, that footing of this existing wall may be high, and if it is, once we establish elevations, we'll put a curb up and over this footing right up against the block wall. That could be a nice area for some potted plants or something to set on. But that's the whole scope of this job. And the exit for the drain, all underground, will come right down here through this new gate opening, and it'll just we'll do a floater bubble up right here, back a sidewalk, and then the water will push that lid up. The water will flow out and over the sidewalk into the street. The other option is you core through the curb and dig under the sidewalk. That's all off-site, and that's public works, so that's another permit. But in the case what we're doing here, it doesn't require any permits to this point, so that's usually the best bet. Avoid permits if you can, and then everything goes much smoother that way. Anyway, have a good one. Stay tuned and watch this whole process play out. All right, so here's the dig out process. We're just going to do this all by hand, wheelbarrows and shovels, picks. Basically, it's just removing a lot of the weeds and grass at this point, roots, getting the loose vegetation out of there, and then regrading the backyard. There wasn't very much dirt to come out in the end. We probably only took maybe one wheelbarrow or two, but mostly weeds was about all we had to really remove out of here. Okay, so here I am setting up the mow strip that's going to encase the artificial turf. And then here's the compactor running behind me. That's Ramon's on that, running that. And we had a little problem with that machine because I probably sat for a couple weeks before I fired it up, and ended up having to do a carburetor rebuild basically on site. And then it ran like a charm. And now what's going to happen is we're going to get the ground nice and moist, get it really wet, let it soak in for about 30 minutes, and then compact. Now back to the mow strip. Just going to set up the mow strip so I can pour that at the same time as the patio and side yard, all one piece. I'll just put a little joint where that curb, planer curb, hits the patio area. We're just using some 2.5 inch by 18-inch wood stakes, 3/4 inch thickness, duplex nails. I'm using number 6s. So now that we've got the area completely graded out, we've got our lines snapped, or a lot of them are already snapped on the wall and house. Now we can start to dig our trench in for a drainage line. The way we're going to dig this is pretty much, we don't want to over dig it, because a lot of times what I found is when you're digging with equipment, you have a good tendency to over dig. But when you're digging by hand, you can only under dig, I've noticed for some reason. But that's just the way it works. So in other words, the drain pipe won't have a extra deep footing because we're digging it by hand, which is good for settlement reasons in the future. If you get a lot of loose dirt under your pipe and that pipe gets weighted with water in it and some leakage around loose uncompact, so the pipe will drop and then it'll separate. So you don't want to over dig on these unless you plan on pre-compacting your trenches, which nobody does, in residential especially. Here's some of that copper ground that I'm reworking. It had been disconnected from the copper pipe in the house. So I'm resetting up the ground clamp and dropping that little ground rod below grade. So I slammed that down with the sledge, redid the cable clamps and pushed them against the wall. So now we have a pretty clean area there to pour around. Also, that galvanized nipple, that's going to get cut out of there. You see that sticking up? That's the old pipe. So that'll be gone too. So here's the digging process. And we hit some concrete over here. And here's the DeWalt cordless 9-inch. Cutting it up. And cut it real quick and easy. What that is the footing below grade. They used to have a patio cover on this, and so we figured it's either part of the footing wall sticking out or it was a patio cover footing that we just had to kind of break in half to get our pipe to run through. We're not doing any 90s on this drainage system, other than, you guess you'd say it's a 90 on your T, but other than that, it was 45s. We're also going to run this around and pick up the downspout. All the uprights right now are going to be out of the main concrete areas. It's going to be in the artificial turf area at actual drain grates. So we'll have 2 over here in the side yard underneath the artificial turf. And then we're going to have another one in the planter. What we're doing here, we're just setting up the end of the pour. That's where that patio ends. And then we tie into artificial turf. So even though we've got it formed up, everything's dug out 4 inches deep below top of concrete. That's how this whole thing, even where the artificial turf, we just graded all the same. So you end up with 4 inches of base, compacted road base, or you could use sand and gravel mix. And in this case, on this side yard, I used just a straight sand and gravel mix. It's a little more expensive than your crushed concrete base to put under turf, but what it does is it drains much quicker than your crushed concrete. So that's why we went with that. So we this whole side yard is almost like a French drain system right into native. When you get into that concrete crushed rock, the water doesn't really absorb through it. It's like think of a 1 sack cement blend. That's what the road base is, concrete crushed. It's about maybe not even a 1 sack, maybe a half a sack PSI. Because that, even though it's crushed concrete, it still reacts somewhat with water again. So it's not a good drainage type material. So I went with sand and gravel, in other words, under the turf. Now, when I was working on the stucco, as you can see right here, I'm taking that 9-inch cordless, zipping it right at my chalk line. And that's that little pop out. Basically, it's a pop out under your patio slider door to carry the threshold made out of stucco. That's getting cut off. That way, I don't have that protruding into the concrete, because that potentially could be a couple of crack points, you know, because you got those little knockouts. So rather than having to deal with those crack points with a whole bunch of extra saw cuts or control joints, I'm just going to cut it off flush to the foundation. Then I'm going to glue some foam up under there. And you'll see that too. I'm just using some foam with some 3M spray-on adhesive. I just got done brushing the surface clean a little bit. And I have a chalk line that I'm following. I sprayed the 3M adhesive. That's that Super 77 stuff. Really good. It's good glue. Sprayed on both surfaces and then just push it on there. It's kind of like contact cement at that point. Then you can flood the area. Do whatever you want to it. It doesn't move. You can get it wet. It doesn't change. The old felt, on the other hand, the old felt system with concrete nails into the foundation and all that never worked, because as they got hot and cold and wet and dry, they ended up buckling and popping nails. The foam, one and done type of thing. Here's that drain system I was talking about. This is where it's going to exit. And this coupling, this funnel coupling here, actually has a hole in the bottom of that 90, because this is the lowest point of the pipe right here. So what happens is, as the water, you get a heavy downfall, the system fills up with water to the drain lines, and water seeks its own level, so it pushes out the low end, which is right here. But the residual water that it takes to push out the majority will set in that pipe, so there's a hole in the bottom of the pipe where it would naturally just absorb into the ground over time. You know, assuming you get a few days of break without rain. In most cases you do, unless it's one of those 40 days and 40 nights thing, then you have a problem, but typically we don't get those. Now, here's your number 3 rebar going on 2-foot centers. Ramon and Jose, father-son duo over here. They're knocking this thing out pretty quickly with me. They're tying these up at 2-foot centers. Here we are in the backyard. A little landing outside that back garage door. This drain will be cut down lower, below concrete, and then artificial turf in between these stepping stones. Like this is going to be turf here, 1 foot wide area. Then you have approximately a 2x3 stepping stone. One more drain over here, because this concrete just straight grade slope right to here. So the turf will just slope into this drain. It won't be visible, it'll be underneath the turf. And then water will go through the turf into the drain. Pumper has arrived. All right, the pumper and the concrete truck have arrived. This is Associated Ready Mix, also known as A&A. And then I have 4L concrete pumping. We have Lolo, and then we have Juan, a couple of other guys here, Carlos and Jose. They're all here laying this down. Here's your 2x3 stepping stones. All this lumber. I left them full lengths on the outside, and then I just cut some spreaders to create that stepping stone effect. The concrete mix we're using here is a 3000 psi with fiber mesh. It's a stealth fiber. I think it's called Buckeye or Buckshot something like that. I believe it's Buckeye, but it's barely visible. Even when you broom it, you can't. It doesn't really ball up like some of the fibers. So we're wall to wall in here, although we do have a 1/2 inch piece of expansion foam along the house. Now, in this particular situation, some people would want foam on both sides, but I think one side or the other is plenty good. You can either put it on the block or the house or both. And I chose the house because it was it's slump stone on the left side. That wall's called slump, so very irregular. So it's hard to glue the foam on there and get a straight. You're not going to get a straight edge. So we glued it onto the house in this particular case. But the real reason you put that on in here, it's not because of freeze and thaw, because we're in Southern California. You know, it's year-round beach weather basically. But so you don't have to worry about expansion control. What you do have to worry about is earthquakes. So the foam in the house, let's say the house is getting hit with a trembler, or in the wall we're getting an earthquake, the wall and the house move independent from one another. And if the concrete is bound in between the two, something's got to give. So that's why you want, you know, the foam in there, so it has some space. All right, here's the bowl float going down on it. This is a 4-foot wide bowl float. You really got to get it on the way out of this yard because we're in tight quarters, you might say. And this wall is solid, fortunately. It's solid grouted, the top cap, so it was very stable. Some walls I won't walk on. This is a very difficult job to actually place because once you get all the concrete in, there's no way back into the backyard again without walking the wall or climbing over the house. One or the other gets you into the backyard. Or, I mean, you don't want to walk through the wet concrete to get back there. So you try to avoid that. Get around both ends so you can work the whole thing with pull tools. So yeah, in this case we did 10 yards. We ended up running out and we had to re-rod, but you'll see that in the next video because that's going to be the second half of this pour. We're going to show some turf in this video as well, turf install around these stepping stones, and how the drain system works underneath the turf. This is our first pass on the knee boards. Right now what we're doing at the same time, we're checking it for level. You can see the 4-foot level in between the two guys. They're checking slope off of the house, and the water should come towards me because we have the drain underneath the turf behind us here. So they're just double checking it that we got good drainage here. This is the time you would change it if you had to. Like if you had some low spots or high spots, you could just kind of carve it at this point with the level and get it nice and flat. Here's the process of smoothing. Now this is our second pass on everything we did. We did everything twice by hand and we were ready for broom. This entire pour lasted from start to broom 3 hours. That's how much time we had to get this thing in shape. So you figure an hour to lay it down, now you have about 2 hours to get it smooth and a nice, even, consistent finish. And it's nice when it goes off like this, when it's going off quick, because a lot of times what happens, if it's drying in phases or it's drying slow, it'll dry super slow in the shadow and it'll dry really fast in the sun. But with this mix, this particular mix design, it all went off fast, even in the shade, which is what you want. That way you got an even finish all the way through. This part really never seen the sun, this area, and it was brooming the same time as the stuff in the direct sunlight. Now here's the second day after the pour, and it's saw cut time. If you'll notice, I put no joints in this during the pour, because when you do it the next day, you have a lot more control over where you put them and how you put them. So I always like to saw cut. It's a clean, a very narrow line. So if you're rolling things over it, they don't get stuck in the joint. It doesn't hold a lot of dirt and water in them, so you never really get stains. Now, if you see a lot of the big joints that have been around for a while in concrete, you'll notice stains a lot of times seeping out from the joints from debris settling and water erosion in a wide joint, but you won't see that in saw cuts. Yeah, your tool joints typically are about a 1/2 inch wide. When you're doing it on wet concrete, it's about a 1/2 inch wide, maybe even up to 3/4, depending on the type of joiner you're using. But in this case, it's only about, 1/4 inch wide with the saw cut. I'm using the Medusa made by Skill, and I'm hooked up to a DeWalt cordless vacuum. I've adapted a couple extra lengths on that vacuum so I can do a lot more cutting without moving it around much. After I cut, even though I vacuum up about 90% of the dust, which allows me not to have to wear a dust mask, and I'm hooked up to a vacuum, I always pressure wash still. Not only is it good for the concrete getting it wet the next day and keeping it wet for about 3 or 4 days, that's good for the concrete, but also you can get all the debris, the residue from the saw cut off the slab, and any splatters of concrete that may have landed on the wall. It comes right off with the pressure washer, or even on the glass. If you get some on the glass, the pressure washer knocks it right off. No biggie. Now we're prepping. We've got the saw cuts. Now prepping the underlayment for the artificial turf. And that particular area is clean sand and gravel. It's not your crushed concrete base that you would typically see. It's a little more expensive, but like I was saying, it allows the water to drain through. So I've got really kind of like a big catch basin here, or a French drain system. Also, I have drains that go to the street. I have 2 3-inch drain grates back here underneath the turf, and the turf is sloped to the drain, so anything that drains back there is going to hit those drains or just naturally drain through the gravel and sand. But here's a nice shot. Imagine if this was, say, decomposed granite, I suppose. Decomposed granite would even be fairly decent right here, And you got some different colors in that you could throw down. So here's the turf we're putting on here. This is a dog-friendly or pet-friendly turf. A lot of the pet-friendlies you'll see are really short-bladed, but this happens to be a long blade, which I like a lot better. The short blades on turf doesn't look so natural. Most of your pet-friendly ones are short little blades, and it looks more like maybe a Bermuda or something, not very appealing. So I like the long blades, and that's what this is. He used a carpet, a typical indoor carpet stretcher that you would see laying carpet in a home. You use the same tool to stretch this out. Another key ingredient, to getting a good sod install is before you even install or cut the roll or do anything, you lay the whole thing out in a good sunny area for a few hours just to get it hot, get the fabric hot, the backing hot, because that way when you start stretching it with your carpet puller, it stretches out to its fullest potential. Because if it doesn't on a cold day, and you don't get it stretched, when a hot day comes around, you end up with wrinkles or bubbles all over your turf. So that's one of the key things you'll want to do. It's kind of like laying hardwood, in a home. If you've got hardwood, or you've got, simulated wood coating, the composites, you got to set them and acclimatize them in the house before you lay those. It's similar to that, but you got to acclimatize it outdoors instead of indoors, basically. But see these nails right here? What he's doing here is he's lining them up with all the heads pointing in one direction. And I was getting some nice stories from him on some different job sites he's worked at in the past with turf installs, or one of the guys was grabbing handfuls of nails and slamming them in with his palm, to get him started through the turf. But one of the nails was flipped over when he was going through. He had maybe 50 in his hand. Pop, pop, pop with the palm of his hand. One of them was upside down. When he did that, it went right through the palm of his hand. So now he likes to make sure he stacks them all and double checks them to make sure they're all in the same direction. But what I was thinking is you get a glove, right? Get like an oversized glove, put on your hand, and stuff like a big rubber pad under there, and then just go for it. I'm thinking about patenting that idea, so if you're thinking about it, I might get the patent on that first. It's going to be an automatic palm nailer for artificial turf install. Knowing my luck, I'm always a day late and $1 short in those patents, That's just the way it is. Now here's how you tuck your sod. Now here's the cutting technique, getting around these stepping stones. These little individual 2x3 pieces are getting cut out. They seem like they would be a waste, but in actual, it makes a really nice little door, a welcome pad, going in and out of the house to kind of clean your feet off before you walk in. So, you can use them for that, or maybe for just a little dog pad somewhere for the dog to sleep on, or do its business on. This is how you put the sand. We're using 30 silica. We're also using a special granule that allows urine and feces from dogs to absorb into the grass a little bit easier without the odors. Now we're going to use a power brush on this to brush the blades up straight and pull the sands evenly around every blade. And that will help maintain the blade at its full height. Anyway, that about wraps it up. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification button. That way you'll be notified on my next upload. Have a good one.